the first power of the ego is darkness. It is the energy that comes in that's a heaviness, that feels like depression, that keeps you feeling alone or lonely or like you don't fit in, or that life isn't worth living anymore. It has all these like tunnels and tunnels, and all you can see is dark and you can't see any light. So, second power of the ego is actually.
Hey, soul family. Welcome to the Alive and Awake podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Kay, and I have spent the last 20 years teaching people how to work with their wounds and overcome their greatest fears so they can learn how to thrive in a world where they were only taught to conform. Each week, we will dive deep into the practical, the spiritual, and the mystical so I can teach you how to do the inner work to know yourself, trust yourself, and eventually love yourself enough to create a world where you feel fully alive, awake, and free. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode. Ready? Let's dive in.
Welcome to another episode. I can't even believe that it's 25 episodes in, and I feel like I'm just getting started. So I just want to take a minute to thank all of the people who continue to follow me, who send me messages to give me so much support, that really inspire me to keep creating content and keep living from my heart and speaking what my soul wants to speak. Because right now, I'll tell you, there's a lot of forces out there that want to create fear and doubt and dumb us down. I mean, there was a big part of me that I noticed. I'm like, I don't even know if I want to get on and talk today. But I knew that I was inspired and I felt called to do that. And so I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for being someone who seeks wisdom, who seeks knowledge, who clearly does their inner work and really tries to evolve into the best versions of themselves for our planet. It cannot be understated that the work that you continue to do on yourself and that you continue to evolve into is changing our consciousness and the energy on the planet. And right now, as you can see, there is massive division going on. So if you're tuning in a little bit later to this is just post-election podcast where people are massively being disrupted. There's some of my clients who are falling apart. They're decompensating. They're in such fear around what's going to happen with their rights. And, they're really just in a very, very, very dark place. And I felt called to come on today to talk about the 7 powers of the ego or of the flesh. And what that is, or what the ego is the personality self. So it literally is the body that you would consider to be in human form. It is you and the personality that you chose to come into this body with as a soul. And the ego accumulates all of the experiences that you've been through since the day that you were born and every lifetime that you've ever been in your past lives. So it holds a lot of power and it can take over at times and make us feel separate from source, from creator God, from love. Whatever you choose to believe in is perfectly welcome on this channel. But it really does keep us from feeling the love of God, the love of source, the love of the universe, the love from another person, even in human form. And when these powers take over, which we can clearly see is happening in collective consciousness right now, it can feel really hopeless. It can feel really helpless. It can feel very dark, and it can rob you of your divine birthright of peace, love, joy, and the disbelief in separation, of connection. That's what I'm looking for, of coming together. It can make us feel very, very, very separate from each other. And as light workers on the planet, as people who are essentially sharing love and spreading light and seeing everyone as equal, as, a version of yourself in human form, we can have a really hard time with people who are in what we have now labeled as like a lower level consciousness or a lower level density or frequency. And as someone who may be more spiritually evolved, it's easy to get in the mindset of, well, I'm more awake than them, or I'm farther along than them. So I know more. And that actually is a really dangerous energy to get into. And I personally was confronted with that this month, or actually this week, sorry. And it was having a conversation with a friend, and it ended up being a conversation that ended with, well, you just don't understand where I'm coming from because you wouldn't care because you're not a person of color. And the truth is that it really crushed me to hear those words, or having that person feel that I didn't understand them because I wasn't the same color as them. And I do believe that there is truth to that. However, I do believe that the suffering that we've endured as a collective is the same, right? Like we all know oppression, we all know suffering, we all know immense pain and fear. And so when you get into a conversation like that with someone, I always invite the mantra or the reflection of, if this is happening to me, then this is happening for me. And it's easy to react and to try to defend yourself or try to prove that you're right. But all that does is create more separation and more disconnection on the planet that we do not need right now. And I had to really reflect on some of the words that we're saying. Was I coming from a place of self righteousness, of thinking that because I'm farther along in my spiritual path, this person just doesn't get it or they're not getting it yet? And we can easily be caught in that trap. And the truth is like, that's ego, right? Thinking that we are above anybody else and not seeing that person as your equal complement is a power of the ego. So today's episode is going to be a little bit challenging. And I encourage you to really take a look at where your ego may be having power over you to not only keep you separate from God, from the source of life and love or life giving energy, but separate from each other. And it was a beautiful lesson that I had to go through over the last 3 days to really reflect and look at, if I feel that I'm going to be a teacher on the planet and I'm going to be someone who chooses to live in love and see everybody as their own sovereign being, then I have to be willing to look at and face the parts of myself that I may be putting out there that is a shadow that I may not even have been consciously aware of. And it ended up being a beautiful conversation of truth and of awareness and coming together, even though we have different views on politics, on what's happening with the world, on what's most important right now. It actually ended up being a very productive conversation, truthfully, because I was able to reflect and own my shit. But a lot of people aren't doing that. So I invite you to use this podcast and this episode to really dive into what may be going on within you that's keeping you separate and keeping you with a closed mind or a self righteous, powerful way of being. Um, so the ego, again, is the part of you that is your personality that you've accumulated throughout your life, and it holds on to all of your experiences. But underneath the ego and all of the wounds that it holds is your divinity, is your pure, loving heart that only can see unconditional love surrounding us on the planet. And it is a higher level of consciousness to get there. And as the ego and the higher self start to merge, they can become partners, they can become allies to help you continue to grow and evolve and peel back the layers of everything that is not you or in is the not self, which I talk about on one of my previous episodes if you're curious about that. So to dive in, I really was called by spirit. I was like, okay, so how do I explain this in a way that the collective is going to understand. And it brought me to a book that I read with Mary Magdalene, who is the first disciple of Christ Jesus. She was written out of the Bible, but she was Jesus's right hand woman and twin flame. And she got a lot of firsthand knowledge from Jesus that was essentially buried in a cave in Egypt in an urn that wasn't discovered until this century. So a lot of her teachings are coming out now. And I love how she describes in her gospel what the powers of the ego are that keep us hooked and keep us from forgetting our divinity. And so the first power of the ego is darkness. It is the energy that comes in that's a heaviness that feels like depression, that keeps you feeling alone or lonely or like you don't fit in, or that life isn't worth living anymore. It has all these like tunnels and tunnels, and all you can see is dark and you can't see any light. This happens when people go through a lot of painful experiences or they continue to stay in situations that are not life giving, essentially like a job that's sucking the life out of you, that every day that you go to that you feel drained by, or a relationship that isn't life giving, that makes you feel like whatever you do isn't good enough, and that you essentially feel trapped and you don't know your way out. And essentially, this part of your ego doesn't want to play the game of life anymore because they're tired of it. So if you're coming across someone that is like this, the last thing that you want to say to them is the things that I'm communicating to you, right? You empathize with that. You speak to the soul. I know that there is a part of you in there that knows what to do. I know that there's a part in you that knows what you need to make you feel alive. And maybe you're afraid of that. Maybe you're afraid to take that next step or to leave that job or to leave that relationship, but it is soul crushing because the light of your soul is consumed by darkness. And actually, that is what's happening on our media platforms right now, right? If you turn on the news, none of that is life giving energy. It's soul sucking energy. It's infiltrating people with darkness and fear and rage and bitterness and all the things that are keeping us in a lower level vibrational energy. And what I believe is the purpose of all of that, right? If you feed darkness with darkness, then people stay asleep and they don't know God and they don't know their power and they don't know how to change the planet and feed all of our children and rescue children from sex trafficking and give women the rights that they want and learning how to work with each other in sacred union and seeing each other as equal. Like, my gosh, if we actually saw life giving energy on the news, could you imagine what would happen on this planet right now? Could you imagine if like it was shown all the miracles that are occurring around the world right now and how people are being kind together and they're coming together and they're rescuing each other, like, through the hurricane that just happened in like North Carolina? Could you imagine if that was the stuff that was on our mainstream media? Like what that would do for the collective consciousness, to give them hope, to give them inspired, to make them feel inspired. But no, it's not meant to do that. So it keeps people living in the power of the ego, which is darkness. And you yourself can choose to change that, but you also can't make anybody choose to do that work. It is a soul journey, but you have to meet them with love and respect. And yes, boundaries if that is not for you. So, second power of the ego is actually something that I struggle with because I do believe that desire is divine, right? I believe that desire is our divine calling for our purpose, for what we want to cultivate in this life, and how we want to feel. However, there is a shadow side of desire, which is like craving and clinging and longing that essentially is crushing your soul because you can't find joy in the present moment. You essentially think that you need something outside of you in order to make you feel fulfilled. So it becomes an unhealthy attachment or almost codependent relationship around like, I crave this so much and I need this to survive to be happy. So, whether that is a person, whether that is a substance, whether that is, I want to say a child. I don't know why that's coming to me right now, but I know that like some people are so codependent on their children for their own happiness that it's like life sucking, like it's a life sucking energy that is never ever fulfilled, right? Like it doesn't matter how many times a person says I love you, if you need that to feel alive, it will never ever fill your empty cup because you're not connected to your soul and the source of your creation. So you're never essentially satisfied, and it can make you feel like you're not a sovereign being. You need all of these things outside of you, and you cling to these things outside of you in a really like unhealthy way, and you become so attached to them that you fear losing them, and you forget that you're on a journey to experience all types of different relationships, all types of different experiences in your life. And so the ego can have the power over you and trick you into believing that you will not be okay if you don't have this person, you don't have this job, you don't have this substance. And it can become like a really powerful energy if you feed that too long. Which we see a lot of people in, right? Like clinging to the idea or to the fact that this person has to be in our government in order for me to feel okay, in order for me to self-regulate. And it's a very dangerous energy to get into because when that outcome doesn't happen, all the disruption can happen inside because it's really bringing up and exposing a lot of the wounds and the feelings of helplessness. And that comes from unhealed, unprocessed childhood trauma, which is incredibly sad. So we have to have compassion for that. It is the only way out of the darkness that we're under right now. So the third power of the ego is what is called ignorance. And I do believe that there is an ignorance that is purposely unconscious. And so ignorance to me really means just lack of awareness. And I do believe that each person and each soul goes through a period where they lack the awareness to understand what's going on with them on a deeper level in order to repeat karmic patterns and go through the experiences that you need to go through in order to evolve. However, what happens is the shadow aspect of ignorance is that when we fall back into an unconscious reaction or we act in an unconscious way that causes ourselves pain or causes another pain, and then you don't want to look at it, you're not curious about it, and you're not willing to do the work to change it. So essentially, you become ignorant. You live in denial, and we see that a lot happening on the planet and the collective right now. One of my spiritual teachers calls this the advanced reptilian energetic on the planet, or somewhat like narcissistic. Of I'm refusing to look within. I'm refusing to take ownership of what my part is in this, and I'm projecting all of my stuff onto you and blaming you because clearly you're the problem, right? So that to me is ignorance, and that is the power that the ego has over you if you choose to feed it, and if you choose to like essentially stay in a relationship with someone that is in it, because it is the denial of your true self, and your true self is only love, and love comes with an incredible amount of accountability and responsibility for your behavior, your choices, your words, your reactions, and how you show up in the world, which is a really difficult thing for people to do. And some people choose to let their ego take over. And again, that's their choice as a sovereign being. But you, as a person of knowledge, as a person of wisdom, can say, that's not enough for me. I want to be in a place where someone is receptive to hearing feedback, or someone's receptive to hearing my side of things and having a collaborative, compassionate conversation to understand one another and come closer together. So super hard energy to work with, but it happens all the time. We have a default mode, right? Our default mode sometimes can be rage or anger. Our default mode can be anxiety. Our default mode could be like fear. But if you're willing to look at yourself and understand and become curious, then that's not ignorance, right? That's not staying asleep. That's actually choosing to wake up and discover more about yourself or someone else. So I don't know why it just also came to me as like calling someone else ignorant, like that's not life giving either. Like we can't say that in our mind because all that is a mirror or it's a projection of like if I'm calling someone else ignorant, then in what way am I also that your soul wants you to take a look at? If you start to really look at this world as only like an outer reflection of your own projections, it becomes such a more fun game to play because then you feel like you have an internal locus of control and you have more power over how you choose to operate and what you choose to perceive and believe. So the fourth one, this is really, I'll be honest with you, something that I was faced with quite a bit this year. And that is the power, or I'm sorry, the fourth power of the ego is essentially the craving for death. And I know that that sounds really strange, but it means that there's a part of the human self or a part of the flesh that can never get enough and is never satisfied, essentially causing physical harm to the body and physical harm to the longevity of life. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, that looks like gluttony or one of the seven deadly sins, they call it. And the reason they call it deadly is because it crushes the soul or it crushes the body, which is a temple of God. And when I think about how I've struggled with this, the two biggest mountains that I've learned how to climb and I'm on the other side of is an insatiable appetite for food where it feels like I can never get enough, even if the meal is really, really good. I'm thinking about the second one. Like when I was really deep in my bulimia and I was hanging out with one of my best friends, I'm sitting there eating and I'm talking about what's the next meal? Like, what are we eating next? And she always laughs at me and jokes about me, like, Alicia loves food. And the truth is like, I do love food. And I've learned to love it in a healthy way, like, and enjoy eating mindfully and enjoy eating the sensations and the taste and savoring the food. However, back then, what that really came from was because I felt starved as a child, meaning not that I was starved, but I felt like I never had enough. There was never enough money. There was never enough food. There was never enough love. There was never enough attention. There was never enough safety. And so, of course, a part of my ego developed for an insatiable appetite to want to harm myself to the point where I would eat so much that it would cause me physical pain. Or same thing with alcohol. I would drink so much and I would never want to stop once I got started because I always wanted the party to keep going and I never wanted it to stop. And it causes a lot of physical damage, as you can imagine, to have this power take over, which we all struggle with, which can look like any type of an addiction, right? Of never having enough. This is truthfully a blanket that over covers humanity of this sensation of never being enough, never having enough, never getting enough, and never truly feeling satisfied. So, one of the things that I personally did to change this within myself was I started telling myself the mantra of I've always had enough, I am enough, and I will always have enough, right? I've always had enough, I am enough, and I will always have enough. So it's the past, the present, and the future, right? When you change the script, the words that come out of your mouth are so powerful that the water in your body actually has to crystallize and create an alchemical process for that new belief system to take root, because it's an automatic process when you start speaking life-giving language over the ego, because the ego only holds on to fear. The ego is fear, and it's made to protect you. It has a very powerful role, but it also is anti-life energy. And so when you start speaking life energy over yourself and you start to feel like you'll always have enough and that you'll always be satisfied and that there's always more to come, then you actually can just drop into a calm of truth, of it is true. And I get to enjoy myself and my life and what I am putting into my body. And I can stop when my body is sending me signals that it's full, or that it's, I'm not moving in a direction that's going to fulfill me. So I encourage you to look at the ways in which this power takes over in your life and learn how to change the things that you're telling yourself so that you can create a different dynamic and a different pattern. And if you feel called to, question this part of you, like I did when I discovered like the inner child in me that never felt like she had enough. Like, of course I'm going to develop a binge eating disorder when I'm in my 20s, and I don't know myself very well yet, and I don't know God, and I don't know source, right? I'm just coping, I'm self-soothing, I'm doing whatever I need to do to avoid the pain that I felt in my body, and that can look like gluttony, unfortunately. Uh, so hopefully that was helpful. If you need help with that, I'm always available to reach out with questions, or if you want to hear a little bit more about that, or a second podcast on how to dive into that deeper, I'm so open to discovering or to dropping more knowledge about that topic, because I know it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And the fifth one is the enslavement to the body, and what that means, it means like I'm only living in the realm of the flesh. I am only a body. I am not a spirit. I am not a soul. And when that happens, we can live in a lot of fear and we can cling to a lot of things in the physical, meaning that I'm afraid of what's going to happen to my body. I'm afraid of death. I'm living in a constant perpetual state of fear of what's going to happen. I don't believe that I'm an eternal being having a human experience. And so we grip onto things in the physical when we only believe that we are a physical body. And then when we live like that, we also lust after people or lust after things. Like it could be seeing another person and like not knowing that they're also a soul that has a child. Like this is how we could like murder or rape, or things happen where we like take from the flesh and take from the flesh, and we don't see everybody as divine beings. And it's a darkness that exists on the planet because it exists in the hearts of some of the humans on the planet. And it is the energy of being enslaved to your own body, which I do believe that we are here to alchemize and transcend and transform. So the sixth one actually is it's the opposite of that. It's almost becoming complacent, where I have essentially become the sloth. And so, what that means is I become so conditioned to not believe that there's more to life, to become, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Like too comfortable, and to resist change. When we resist change, then we become almost like sloth like. We start to go through the motions of working a 9 to 5 and punching in for a time clock and not believing that our soul is calling us for more. Essentially, we think it's just our fate to live this way, and we lose connection to the driving force behind us that wants us to experience more in life. And we then just learn to tolerate our lives, instead of being the conscious creator of our lives and listening to the desires of the heart that want more out of life. So the ego can become almost like sloth like without a lot of life energy in it. And I'm sure we all know people like that. I think of older generations that, came through the Great Depression and were literally living just to survive. And it can cause an energy to feel very low and just feel like there's not a lot of life there. And it is powerful. It is a powerful energy to overcome. And so, last but not least, the seventh power of the ego is one that I used to have a lot of shame for. And this is the power of the ego's wrath or rage. And what that is it's not saying that anger is unhealthy, because anger is incredibly healthy. It can show where your boundaries are crossed. It can help you fight for what you believe in. It can, really create change on the planet and in your life. And so I'm not talking about righteous anger, right? Like Jesus went into the temple and he flipped the tables and said, "This does not belong in my father's house." Right? That's righteous anger. I am talking about like rage. So anger or clean anger seeks to resolve. Rage seeks to destroy. And there was a part of me, and I know it very, very well. And it was a part of me that literally sought to destroy. It was a fight energy. I did not care who I was going to hurt. I was destructive. I did hurt people with it. And the truth is that rage comes from a lot of unprocessed and undigested emotional pain. So the reason that it's a power of the ego is because it feels almost justified. Like, well, that person deserves it. And it it keeps us separate from seeing each person as their own divine soul on their own unique path. It almost is like you playing God and thinking that you're the one that has to punish someone because they did something wrong or they hurt you. And it is a very, very unhealthy way to live that causes a lot of pain. So, most people, after they have a rage episode, it comes with an immense amount of guilt, an immense amount of shame. And I had to work through so much of that and ask for forgiveness and ask for spirit to enter me and to really do the work on shifting that. But when you can get to the place of compassion, not only for yourself, but for others, you can transform this and transcend this into something more beautiful, where you can become the warrior that fights with love instead of the warrior that always draws your sword, right? Not everything has to be a fight. And the part of you that wants to fight is the part of you that's disconnected from love, from God. It is the ego taking over in that moment. And it comes with a lot of destruction, destruction of relationships, destruction of your home if you've ever been around somebody who has a rage episode. And it's a very, very scary and powerful energy. So I say all of these things, one, so that you can do some self reflection on what it is that you might still personally struggle with, that your higher self is asking you to really transcend and transform and do some work on, so that you can know who you are in truth and that you can feel the love of source in your body and that you can find who you are outside of the things and the ways of this world. We need this so much on the planet right now. And the more work you can do to understand yourself, and the more work you can do to not only love yourself, but meet each other with love, I truly believe that we can transcend the darkness that's happening in our world right now. Because we also not only have the seven powers of the ego, we have the seven fruits of the spirit, which is our birthright. And what those are is joy, love, peace, kindness, patience, faithfulness, gentleness, meaning meek, humble, and self control. So when you are in touch with your own unique Holy Spirit within you, you automatically want to operate in that way because you're seeking to understand. You're not seeking to compete or destroy. And that energy is the energy that has caused all of this to occur. And when we evolve and we become more enlightened to who we are and where we come from and what we're connected to on the energy on the planet, we can create massive shifts globally. And I feel that that is our calling, right? The time that we're in right now was prophesied centuries ago for the second coming of Christ to come in to the earth plane. And a lot of people believed that that was the second coming of Jesus. And yes, it is, but it is happening inside your own heart. For you to evolve to a level of Christ consciousness where you can be the light of the world, where you can be the love of the world and help people find their way, not to enforce your way onto them, to help people find their own way to their path and their truth of their own divinity. So this was a heavy one, right? Like, if you like this, if you enjoy this, if you want more stuff like this, I am more than open to, giving you more education around it. I highly recommend getting the book, If This Called to You, The First Gospel of Mary Magdalene, where a lot of that is being revealed and taught about what Jesus really taught her about the ego and the powers that he came here to help people transcend out of, and how he saw every single person, no matter who walked in his presence, as perfect and as divine in their human form. And I really, truly, in my heart, believe that that's what we are being called to. But it starts with each individual here. And if you're listening to me, I know that that is you. I know that you have the power within you to do the work that you need to do within yourself to bring more loving energy onto the planet. Now, that doesn't mean sacrificing yourself or sacrificing your soul for someone who doesn't see your light and who doesn't respect you and who doesn't value you. That is not life-giving energy. And I don't recommend anyone stay in any kind of a circumstance like that because they feel called to do that. Sacrificial, abusive energy, not what we're talking about here. But we are talking about staying in alignment with the truth of who you are and what your soul is calling you to do and say and be, as an example on this planet right now. So I hope that this was helpful and that you feel called to get some of your ego in check, as I was very much called to do so this past week. And I can't wait to have more in-depth conversations like this. So please share this with someone that you know, hit the like or subscribe button, and don't forget to support my channel and continue to spread the awareness so that I can get more word out there as we go through this massive energetic shift on the planet right now. Also, if you feel called to dive into your own unworthiness wound, I just put an evaluation up on my website. It is free to take. Please go ahead and fill that out. Also, subscribe to my newsletter. There's tons of juicy content coming out this month around your worthiness, around fighting the darkness, around the ego and the traps that we fall into. Tons and tons and tons and tons of value. And look forward to seeing my online course coming out, hopefully launching that either end of December or January, around learning how to step into your power as a conscious divine feminine being. So lots and lots of fun stuff coming out my way. Thank you again for supporting me, and know that you are loved.